Hello there! In Acts chapter 8, the Apostle Philip tells the good news of Jesus Christ to an Ethiopian eunuch. The man joyfully accepted baptism from Philip and brought his new faith back to the Ethiopian court. He thereby began the legacy of African Christianity that continues to this day, a vibrant and growing family of faith with ancient roots and fascinating history. Although the Bible does not name this man, tradition gives his name as Simeon Bakos. Join us as we explore the world of ancient African Christianity that he originated. Join us as we follow along in Simeon's wake. Supplemental: The City of Legends, the Birth of Alexandria. In the last main episode, we talked a bit about Carthage, home of Rome's erstwhile rivals, and one of the geographic centers of our story. However, the time period we're talking about also sees the rise of another of Africa's great cities, and the center of Roman Christianity in Africa, the great city of Alexandria. Now, if you know anything about ancient Christian history, you know just how many of the church's finest minds were trained in that city. You mostly know because they all have of Alexandria at the end of their names. There's Clement of Alexandria, Origen of Alexandria, Athanasius of Alexandria, and Cyril of Alexandria, just to name a few. So in this supplemental episode, we're going to explore the early history of Alexandria, how it was started, and what made it such a pivotal location for Christians on the continent. Like so many great things, Alexandria began as a dream. Like fewer great things, I mean that Alexandria began as an actual dream. It started, as you might have guessed, with Alexander the Great, who was no stranger to founding cities. Alexander was also no stranger to renaming cities that he conquered after him. But from the beginning, he knew that Alexandria would be special. You see, each night, Alexander slept with a special gold-bound copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow, a copy supposedly gifted to him by Aristotle. One night, while sleeping on his literary headrest, Alexander dreamed that a wise old man appeared to him and spoke these words: "An island lies where loud the billows roar. Pharos they call it, on the Egyptian shore." Knowing a dramatic omen when he saw one, Alexander rose up and immediately set off to find this island. And it turns out that his dream was right. Pharos is a small island just off the coast of modern-day Cairo. In ancient times, it was thought that this island was the home of a minor sea god. Alexander was not to be deterred by anything so pesky as a maritime deity, especially once he realized the value of this piece of land. You see, Pharos was super close to the Nile, but it wasn't on the Nile, which meant that you didn't have to worry about the regular flooding that the Nile got. Pharos also had freshwater supplies nearby, and it could make your sea travel to and from Egypt as easy as possible. There was just one thing that would have made it perfect: a connection to the mainland. So Alexander got there and ordered his troops to begin constructing a causeway, which they did. And just like that, Alexandria by Egypt was born. Now that name is important. The city was called Alexandria by Egypt, not Alexandria in Egypt. See, at this point in time, Alexander's dominance over Egypt was not entirely clear. He didn't want to ruffle too many feathers just yet. More importantly, Alexander knew that he would need a pretentious-sounding name to attract the gentrified hipster apartments that would form the core of the Alexandrian economy. Think about it, you've seen the names. The domicile at the crossing. The dwellings by the shore. The abodes on the isthmus. Panic at the disco. Well, now the same great apartment group is bringing you Alexandria by Egypt. Enjoy all the amenities of traditional Egyptian life in a dynamic new community. Have access to the best lighthouses, libraries, and Hellenistic fashion of the day. Join us with this exclusive invite to Alexandria by Egypt, brought to you by In Simeon's Wake. In keeping with this modern aesthetic, Alexander sketched out the whole city to be on a grid system, kind of like Washington, D.C. All the streets would be at right angles to each other, with the buildings designed to block the strong winds that could come off the seas. It was designed with transportation in mind, and its streets were 30 meters, or about 90 feet, wide. With the sea and freshwater lake blocking two of its four main sides, Alexandria only needed two walls to secure itself against any invaders. Alexander had built the perfect city, and he would never see it. You see, Alexander the Great was happy to have this beautiful city and all, but he had stuff to do. There were whole nations that hadn't yet known the joy of being conquered by him. So Alexander laid down the city plans, told one of his generals to get to it, and rushed off to his next conquest. He would never return, dying in Babylon before the city was truly complete. But it turns out your bucket list doesn't have to end with death. After Alexander died, a big military procession took his body, laid it in an ornate casket, and started lugging it back to Macedon, where he would be buried next to his ancestors. Until his general Ptolemy had a different idea. He met up with a caravan and gave them orders to make a little detour to the south. Now, Ptolemy had been Alexander's closest ally. Not only did he fight with Alexander, he even wrote a biography of the man. Alexander was his friend, his hero, his leader, his OTP, and he was going to stay close to him, even in death. I'm joking, of course. Well, I think I am. I mean, maybe Ptolemy had a crush on Alexander. It kind of seems like half the world did. But no, the more practical reason for Ptolemy's coup was to one-up his rivals. Alexander's death left his empire in the hands of several generals, who had been given control over the various parts and pieces that Alexander had conquered. Whoever claimed possession of Alexander's corpse would gain a boost to their legitimacy as his successor. Ptolemy wanted to make sure that he was the one to get that boost. And so he had the whole funeral procession march to Alexandria, where Alexander was interred in a grand tomb. The tomb was named Soma, which is the name of a newfangled non-denominational church in my city. But there were no praise bands or PowerPoint presentations in this structure. There wasn't even a hipster gentrified apartment complex. Just think about it. Soma, at the tomb. But no. Soma is a Greek word that just means body. Alexander's body was so impressive that even in death, his tomb took its name from it. Now, we don't know where the tomb was exactly. How you managed to misplace a tomb is beyond me, but Alexandria excelled at everything else, so I guess it makes sense they would excel at forgetting stuff too. We have a few clues as to its location. In the ancient city, there was a street named Soma Street, which makes most people think the tomb was probably somewhere around there. And in fact, that street still exists. They don't call it Soma Street anymore, it's called Prophet Daniel Street, and it runs right through the city's downtown. So somewhere underneath the hustle and bustle of that modern city lies the remains of arguably the world's greatest conqueror. But the precise location of the tomb will remain a mystery to us because Ptolemy apparently had better things to do than remember the past. He had a future to build. As I said, when Alexander died, he left a group of generals behind to fight over what to do with his territories. Now Ptolemy had a strikingly modern idea. They should split up the empire into a group of states. Each general would become a governor and would share power with a council that he could consult for bigger decisions. To which the other generals said, "What century do you think you're living in?" and kept right on running their territories as supreme emperors. But Ptolemy practiced what he preached. He kept supreme power for himself, mind you. He was still the pharaoh of Egypt. But he gave Egypt some independence within his portion of the empire, and he gave Alexandria even more independence still. It was a long way from any modern ideas of federalism, but it was closer than anything the ancient world had seen. With its ideal location, economic power, and political independence, Alexandria became the destination of choice throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. It had about 300,000 free residents in the 1st century BC, and if you counted slaves, its population was probably double that, so over 500,000. Greeks in particular flocked to the city and became the most prominent minority group there. But others came from even farther off. In the mid-200s BC, Alexandria played host to a group of Buddhist missionaries from India. Yes, that's right. The Indian Emperor Ashoka sent a team of missionaries all the way over to Egypt alongside some medicinal plants. You see, Ashoka was a convert to Buddhism, and he had a convert's zeal for his faith. Earlier in his reign, he had conquered a region known as Kalinga. It was the only war that Ashoka had fought at the time, and he learned an important lesson. War is bad. Like really bad. Did you know people die in wars? And the blood, it gets everywhere. It's just insane. In Simeon's wake, now brought to you by a firm grasp of the obvious. Horrified by what he experienced, Ashoka converted to Buddhism and its tenets of nonviolence. He swore off all future wars and sent out Buddhist missionaries to spread its nonviolent teachings throughout the world, even to far-off exotic lands like Egypt. Alexandria may have been the first place that Christians encountered Buddhism outside of India. It was a truly cosmopolitan city, a meeting place for what seemed like the entire world. Ptolemy's cosmopolitan vision had its limits, though. Alexandrian society was highly stratified. At the very top were the citizens, a small group of people that could only expand through blood. Your parents had to be citizens for you to even be considered. Then you had to apply, and if your application was accepted, you got to be a citizen. So it was a very small group, but both men and women could be citizens, which was a nice step forward for gender equality. Below the citizens were longtime residents of the city who were respected but not citizens. This generally meant Greek immigrants who were locked out of citizenship because of the blood requirement, but had all the cultural cachet that comes from being the originators of Hellenistic culture. Below those Greek immigrants were native Egyptians and Jews. While some Jews occupied positions of very high regard in the city, the Jews as a whole were confined to their quarters on the eastern side of the town, where they could observe their laws without interference. As far as being a Jew went in the ancient world, it was a pretty good deal, but it still meant a lot of isolation and a lot of misunderstanding from your neighbors. The stratified hierarchy of Alexandria was a major factor in the ethnic tensions that would roil the city for centuries. Ptolemy was determined to make Alexandria the cultural and intellectual capital of the world. And he started where so many city managers and organizers have started before, with a parade. Think the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, only with more gold and less musical theater. One of Ptolemy's parades began with men dressed as horses charging through the streets. They were followed by other men dressed as satyrs, wearing tails and silly ears, and sometimes giant phalluses. The bachelorette party had nothing on Ptolemy's parades. And then came the floats. Floats, it turns out, are not a modern invention. They've been part of parades from the very beginning. However, the engine was a modern invention, so the floats had to be pulled along by teams of up to 180 men, who presumably enjoyed the parade floats a bit less than everyone else. Especially because the floats contained giant statues, or giant vats of wine that poured out booze for all the festival goers, or even zoos. We have descriptions of floats that held crates that contained cheetahs and rhinoceros, and even something described as a large white bear. I have absolutely no idea how Alexandria got its hands on a polar bear, but there you have it, truly a meeting place for the whole world. But believe it or not, those parades barely make the top 3 of Alexandria's cultural achievements. For Alexandria was home to not one, but 2 of the wonders of the ancient world, in its lighthouse and its library. Now, Alexandria was a port city, as I said, and it was designed to facilitate trade throughout the entire Mediterranean. As such, it needed a really big lighthouse to help guide ships to its harbors. And what a lighthouse it had! Well over 300 feet high, it was built of gleaming white limestone that seemed to glow whenever the sun shone on it. At its top, it had a statue of Zeus and a bunch of mirrors designed to reflect light from it during the day and make Zeus look all shiny and such. Now, why you would dedicate a lighthouse to the god of the sky and not Poseidon, god of, the sea, is beyond me, but I guess that's why I haven't built a wonder of the ancient world yet. The lighthouse would endure for 17 centuries, but over time earthquakes, floods, and general disrepair would take its toll as the structure slowly crumbled. Yet its memory endures. It endures in the city, where it is on the flag of Alexandria. It endures in history. And it endures in video games. In fact, in Sid Meier's Civilization 6, the Lighthouse of Alexandria is one of the most important ancient wonders you can build. It'll let your ships move super fast, and you'll get naval dominance, which is really important because that allows you to control the map. Well, anyway, you get the picture. But for our story, the lighthouse pales in significance to the Library of Alexandria. The library's origins lie in the political intrigues following Alexander's death. To make a long story short, there was a fellow named Demetrius who was a politician in Athens. Now, after Alexander's death, there was a split between those Athenians who were generally content with Alexander's rule and didn't mind the Macedonians continuing to run things, and those who were ready to cast off the yoke of their Macedonian oppressors now that Alexander was in the tomb. Demetrius belonged to the former party, and when the new leader of Macedon invaded Athens, he made Demetrius the city's governor. Demetrius decided to make the most of his job and lived in style. He threw massive parties, and he installed 360 sculptures of himself around the city. The anti-Macedonian faction was not having it. Riots broke out. Some folks smashed his beloved statues, others converted them into public urinals. Picking up on this subtle change in vibe, Demetrius fled Athens and went to Alexandria. Ptolemy was not interested in Demetrius's political skills, but he was interested in his scholarship. Demetrius had studied in the school founded by Aristotle, and he was a literature scholar. Ptolemy appointed him as a tutor to his son, Ptolemy II, and asked him to work on solving some nerdy legal administrative reform problems that Ptolemy couldn't be bothered with. One of these extremely nerdy reforms had to do with the city's library. Now, libraries are not nerdy. Libraries are cool, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. But what is nerdy is that Ptolemy I gave Demetrius a budget and told him to buy every single book in the world. Now, wait a minute. I worry that what you thought I said was, told him to buy a lot of books. What I said was, he was to buy every single book in the world. Ptolemy understood that part of his strength was his claim to hold ancient knowledge and culture. If he had a copy of every single book in the world, that would make Alexandria the curator of the world's entire knowledge, and would further increase his power. Demetrius took his job very seriously. He acquired over 200,000 scrolls in his lifetime, and by the 1st century BC, the library contained somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million books. Demetrius and his successors sent emissaries to cities all across the world asking for their books to copy. And they even imposed a book tax. Well, tax might not be the right word. Anybody who came into Alexandria had to turn over their books for inspection. If the inspectors found a book that the library didn't have, it was confiscated and kept in the library. Libertarians will sometimes call taxation legalized theft. Well, this really was legalized theft of knowledge. But the peoples of the world struck back. For as you might imagine, if a library has a mandate to collect every book in the world, and has the money to pay for every book in the world, that is going to increase the market for texts, including forgeries. Soon, the library was employing all sorts of forgery experts to sort out the gold of original authors from the pyrite of fraudulent, forged documents. Now, books are great, of course, but they don't mean much without people to read them. The city's policies also made it an attractive destination for scholars. The royal family personally invited scholars from all over the world who were housed close to the library and given free rein over its resources. They could read whatever they wanted, as long as the book didn't leave the library. They had a banquet room where they could eat free food and chat with other scholars, and had pretty much all the academic freedom they could hope for. It's no surprise that Alexandria became a center for all kinds of intellectual advances. Astronomy, mathematics, geometry, all these and more flourished. The library also became a haven for religion and philosophy. Many of antiquity's greatest teachers studied or taught at Alexandria. Ammonius Saccas, one of the founders of the philosophy of Neoplatonism, taught there. And as we said at the beginning, many of Africa's most titanic figures developed their thoughts in the library's halls. Intellectuals of all stripes, including Christian intellectuals, flourished in the scholarly environment created by the library. Outside its walls, the waves of the Mediterranean crashed and broke, but it was inside, in its quiet stacks, that we truly find Simeon's wake. Thank you for listening to In Simeon's Wake, part of the Earth and Altar Podcast Network. If you liked the episode, please leave it a review and drop a like on that episode at your earliest convenience, or even before. It's nice. If you'd like to support this work, head on over to patreon.com/Ben Wyatt. That's patreon.com/Ben Wyatt, WYATT. Until next time, stay curious.